Sabrina 90s Comic Issue 4. We start out seeing Sabrina say goodbye to her aunts and say that she's got a few errands to run, and wants to grab her jacket and go. She reminds them that Harvey's coming over to study for a while, so she tells her aunts to entertain him for her if she's not back by then. Then Sabrina is surprised at the coat closet ring, and she sees Hilda and Zelda's beauty consultant in the closet. She asks Sabrina if she could help her with some cosmetics, and Sabrina says no, and says she's running late. So why is this woman here? Is she like a door-to-door salesman? I wish she'd get a better job. There's so many other jobs you can do. So needing money isn't an excuse to bother people. Sabrina leaves, and Clarissa says manipulatively that if they're trying to look like ants, the rough edges work for them. And if they trimmed off a few more years, people might mistake them for Sabrina's sisters. I mean, they already look like they are, especially in the 2000s. So Hilda's tempted to get her youth cream, guaranteed to take years off. Then Clarissa goes back into the closet, and we don't see them hand any money to her. So how is that supposed to work? Does she write down their address, and a debt collector goes after them for the money afterwards? Rather than just using her magic to make herself younger for free, because I guess she thinks she's too bad at it to do it right, Hilda tries the cream without reading the instructions like Zelda wants. So again, Zelda's the smart one. Hilda says that there aren't any instructions. I guess she's lying, because why wouldn't there be? She just wanted an excuse not to read. She gives Zelda the cream, as I hope that there are instructions on them, because if there weren't, I would wonder why the makers of that cream don't get sued out of existence from people suffering the same very predictable fate. Even then, Clarissa should have been legally obligated to tell them the proper way to use the cream. They'd be sued constantly. Harvey knocks on Sabrina's door and sees that the door was left unlocked, and when he goes in, the house has been trashed, with a broken vase and a tilted painting. Salem jumps on Harvey, and he asks Salem why he's so glad to see him, and asks why he's dressed all girly. Salem wishes Harvey knew he could talk so that he could tell him how insane it's been around here. But he could let him know immediately. What he should have been written to think was, I wish I was allowed to let him know I could talk without the Witches' Council punishing me. Even then, he'd just freak out and run away if he's an idiot. Predictably, some toddler versions of Sabrina's aunts run over, wanting to make him try on outfits. As I wonder why they made youth cream capable of turning you that young. Younger than anyone would want to be. I guess they used too much at once. But if Clarissa had a conscience and brain, she would have told them what they needed to do and prevented this entire plot. I guess it's confirmed that Hilda and Zelda were really troublemakers when they were little, because they immediately trash the house just because they're young. I guess they got character development to grow out of that. I wanted to ask where Sabrina's aunts got those outfits, but they're witches. They probably just zapped them up. Harvey tells them that Salem doesn't feel like trying on any more outfits. Then, because Hilda's a little girl, she doesn't see the problem with telling Harvey that she and Zelda are Sabrina's aunts and not kids that they're watching. Zelda grabs Sabrina's hands and wants to play, like Hilda does. And Sabrina says she's gonna take the kids upstairs for a while, and distracts him by telling him to get a snack. I guess Harvey assumed that the reason they look like Sabrina's aunts is because they dyed their hair, or Hilda just coincidentally looked like Hilda, and Zelda dyed her hair to look like Aunt Zelda. That's an easier explanation for a mortal to come to than they literally are the aunts. He just thinks they're playing, I guess. I wish a thought bubble from him explained this. On first glance, he just looks too stupid. Fortunately, being made younger didn't result in them losing all of the memories they had up to a certain age that they're at now. Because you think their bodies and therefore minds would have been rewound in time. So I guess their memories were stored in their souls. Or it simply de-aged them without getting rid of the memories they formed. So Zelda's able to tell Sabrina what happened to her, as she and Hilda are jumping on the bed. I like all the different ways the writer's showing them acting differently because they're kids, so it matters because there's consequences. Out of nowhere, Amy shows up at Sabrina's house because she heard Harvey and Sabrina were studying. So she thought she'd drop by and make sure he's being given the right answers. How does she know where Sabrina lives? That's creepy. She doesn't like her. What, did Harvey tell her? Why? At least it's considerate of her to try to help Harvey. I mean, she has a boyfriend, so it's not like she's in love with him, is it? Harvey explains that Sabrina's aunts are watching some kids, and Amy decides to give some face cream she just found a try. I guess she's insecure enough to think she needs it. Oh, so she's gonna add to the plot by being a redundant third child. That seems like a waste of time. Still, it adds to her character that she thinks she needs face cream, when earlier she was acting arrogant. Then there's a side story, where Salem's napping and hears Hilda and Zelda making a potion with arbitrary stereotypical things. Then a hair gets plucked from him and he screams, and it turns out the ingredient is hair of a witch's cat. Is that a reference to something? Eye of Newt sounds familiar, but not this. How's it supposed to be a joke? Maybe this would have been funny, or at least satisfying, if Salem did something to deserve it first. And he complains as if this has happened to him before. Do we even know what the potion was for? Sabrina tells the kids to knock it off because she's trying to consult Clarissa. And Zelda says that they missed her. At least they're having fun. That's a huge advantage to being a kid. You can have fun all you want without feeling frustrated that you're wasting your time. Clarissa shows up, and she wishes that Sabrina could have cleaned the closet first. Sabrina apologizes, and Clarissa tells her the predictable problem. And she's still smiling, implying that this has happened all the time. And because bullshit, none of the spells Sabrina's tried have reversed the spell. I call bullshit on that. All Sabrina would have to do is imagine them looking as she remembers. Hell, she could look at a picture of them. I think they're purposely enchanted so that they have to buy aging cream as an antidote for it. So at least this time, this is justified because there's a proper explanation for it. I remember this kind of thing happening more than once in the Sabrina comics, like in the animated series comic, where Sabrina can't use her magic to undo a problem. And I immediately hated it as a diabolos ex machina because the writer got lazy. But at least the last two times, it's made sense, if you think about it. And Sabrina somehow knows what the Better Broomsticks and Business Bureau is, threatening to report her if she doesn't get the aging cream already. She just found out she was a witch just a few issues ago. She'd be a better audience surrogate if she was a naive newcomer to the whole thing, like in the show. I guess she knows about it because that's what she had to call to get her back. Sabrina meets up with Harvey and hears a crying sound from the bathroom, and now Sabrina meets up with Amy. So why didn't she cry earlier and alert Harvey and Sabrina to her much earlier? That'd be more natural writing. Wouldn't she have alerted Sabrina to her back when she was waiting for Clarissa? Zelda wants to turn Amy into a monkey so they can play, and Harvey says that kids have such imaginations. Sabrina thankfully whispers while saying that she shouldn't turn into a monkey, or she'll have a timeout to the next millennium. I love that line. Only in Sabrina would I see something like this. And it's good to have Sabrina have a morality moment, because most of the time she's more of an anti-hero who takes gleeful joy in using her magic. But it's against bad people, so I can understand. But this needs to happen every so often to remind us that she's supposed to be a good guy. But of course she wouldn't take pleasure in someone else turning Amy to a monkey. The doorbell rings, and Harvey assumes it's coming from the door, when it's actually from the closet. But can't we tell where noise is coming from? Clarissa shows up, and Harvey wisens up, saying that he's going home because he's not going to get much studying done here. Sabrina is polite, and it's sweet that she thinks this is the first time she's ever been glad to see him go. Clarissa tells Sabrina to apply the cream sparingly, so that it will return them to their proper age. How's she supposed to know what exactly she means by sparingly? Shouldn't she apply it herself? Instead, Sabrina tells her goodbye. And Amy's taking a nap because she's tired. So Sabrina's able to get them all back to normal, without us getting to see them as old ladies. That was a twist. It's underwhelming that barely anything came out of Amy being turned into a kid. All we saw was her asking for a mother. But if she was acting like herself, she would have been mean to Sabrina, and that wouldn't be fun to watch. And conveniently, she didn't have to erase Amy's memories because she had been napping, so she assumes that it was all just a dream. I like that she wasn't mean to Sabrina. Then when some lady asks to sell them all cosmetics, the door slams and Amy runs screaming out of the house. I guess she is naturally beautiful, despite her wanting to use face cream. And that's why nobody will comment on her looking different by her being scared out of ever using makeup again after this. In the next story, Sabrina stares into a microscope in chemistry class and says that the world of science is fascinating. Amy says stereotypically that if Sabrina spent less time on science and won her appearance, she'd be more popular. First of all, I wasn't unpopular in school. The students were all fine with me, and I liked science class. I don't know why Amy thinks this has to be an either-or situation. I think Sabrina only focuses on science in science class. How does that make it impossible to improve your appearance? Amy just jumped at an excuse to be mean to Sabrina. At least this panel is showing that Sabrina likes science, but it conflicts with her being a dumb blonde most of the time. I mean, Rick and Morty had an episode where Rick was the life of a party. So he can be popular and still focus on science. Sabrina tells Amy that some people don't need to be the most popular, and Amy calls her a drip, which I consider to be a dated 90s insult I only associate with Sonic Adventurer. So it's ironic that Sabrina gets laughed at instead of Amy, at least in retrospect. Sabrina says that Amy's getting on her last nerve. Harvey tells Sabrina that she's number one in his eyes, and she fortunately thanks him. In a line that actually made me giggle after a while, Amy says, "Sabrina, here are some germs that look lonely. Maybe you could ask one out for a date." How could you ask a germ for a date? Sabrina thinks that while no one's looking, she'll zap her down to size. And she lies that Amy stepped out for a minute. It's good that this time the comic took a while to show Sabrina abusing her magic against Amy instead of her doing it immediately with barely any provoking. It makes her look more relatable. So Sabrina sees Amy among some germs, and she thinks that she'll keep an eye out to make sure microbes don't attack her. Although this is still really irresponsible. Of course, then she gets distracted by Brad, who bumps into her and is fortunately nice enough to apologize. She forgives him immediately, being nice, and thinks that lucky for Amy, she's nice enough not to leave her there and steal her boyfriend. She's an anti-hero, but not evil. Predictably, she can't find Amy because she looked away. She should have assumed Amy would run away from the germs. If Amy subconsciously remembers her suffering because of Sabrina's magic, as in she instinctively knows she should be afraid of her and think of her as a threat because of the bad experiences, that would further justify her being even meaner to Sabrina, even without Brad justifying it. It's like how a woman with no short-term memory can still remember not to shake someone's hand after the last time caused them to get poked with a tack in his hand. She only started being mean to Sabrina without Brad being an excuse after she started using magic, as far as we know. It was funny that Sabrina thought, I wouldn't want to leave her there. Those poor germs. That made me giggle. If the Sabrina comic actually made me giggle as much as the Rick and Morty comic, I'd be impressed. It's a crime against nature that it barely has any issues. It doesn't even have 50 from what I looked up. How? Sabrina, rather than undoing the spell on Amy when no one's looking, puts herself in danger by shrinking herself down to the germs. Amy begs Sabrina to get her out of here without knowing what's going on, as if she subconsciously remembers that Sabrina is capable of more things than most people. A microbe chases her and Sabrina says, "What a baby," while smirking. And finally, a microbe grabs her. What took so long? Also, Sabrina's universe sure is strange. I have a feeling this isn't how any real microbes look. My first clue was the normal-looking eyes of that purple one. Sabrina says she can't do her magic with her arms pinned. But in the first issue, she didn't even have to point. She just made wishes and reality warped for her. Shouldn't she remember that she's such a prodigy at magic? And all she has to do is move her hand to point. She doesn't have to move her arm that much, does she? I guess she got used to pointing to the point where she forgot that she doesn't have to point. Amy fortunately hears Sabrina say that and questions it. And Sabrina tells her amusingly, "Distract him with your annoying voice." She asks what he means without getting offended. And she screams real loud, as I wonder why the microbe hasn't been trying to eat Sabrina. She screams, and the monster's annoyed enough to let her go and go after Amy. Then Sabrina brings things back to normal, complete with making Amy forget all of this ever happened. And kind of realistically, Amy starts sneezing, and Sabrina says while winking at us, "Gee, you must have picked up some germs from somewhere." This was a pretty good issue. I'm impressed. They could have easily padded out the first story by having the ants turn into old ladies, but it was more interesting that they had a second story about something else instead. Oh, there's another story. That's gonna be a treat because this is a good comic book. Harvey shows up and tells Sabrina that he's got the video and popcorn. Sabrina says nervously that that's great while looking behind her. Then she says that she's run into a slight obstacle, her cousin Esmeralda. Based on the halo, I'm guessing she's actually evil. I've already seen this kind of concept in the show with her cousin Amanda. I feel bad for her already. Sabrina at least explains that her aunts were supposed to watch her, but had to leave suddenly. I wish I knew why. So, normally they wouldn't be making her go through this. Harvey forgives her when she apologizes, and she says she'll try to get her to bed early. Sabrina tells Esmeralda to stop sitting on something and levitating it because Harvey can't know they're witches. Gee, it's a good thing she's so far away from Harvey that he can't hear this, right? I guess she is. She says bummer and jumps off, surprisingly doing what she was told. Then she complains that she hates meatloaf. Great, now I'm hungry for it. Haven't had that in forever. She turns it into a burger and fries, and Harvey asks where she got that. She says it's just something she whipped up, as I wonder how someone sitting across the table from her didn't see that. I wish it was explained that part of the spell was making him not notice. Sabrina should say that she got it from under the table. Sabrina's nice enough to tell her that she can eat this in front of the TV if she promises to behave. That's smarter than provoking her by turning it back into meatloaf and demanding her to eat it. She turns the TV on and tells her that the circus is on TV and she's bored by it. Wouldn't it be common sense to switch it to cartoons? Harvey says that the circus sounds so real, and it turns out Esmeralda summoned an elephant and clown to her out of boredom. She tells her to zap it away, and fortunately she does so immediately. She could be a lot worse. Then she tells her to go to bed and says goodnight to Harvey. She tells her to stay in this room with no funny business, and she says she's tired anyways. Salem then shows up and says he doesn't believe her, and she smirks, saying that he's pretty smart. She says that she'd love to be a fly on the wall and hear all of Sabrina's mushy talk. She sees him call her beautiful, confirming that they are dating, and the comic was fast-paced enough to suddenly cut to that with no fanfare about it whatsoever. No drama over it like in the show. That was much faster than the show. Why does she think this is hilarious? Esmeralda sees a fly and angrily flies after it, just to get stuck on some fly paper because she flew into it instead of around it, which would be so much more likely. And she complains that because she's stuck, she can't do her magic. Even though Sabrina used magic just by wishing. Multiple times at the start of the comic. Apparently that issue's not canon anymore? Well, that is overpowered, removing the possibility of her being stuck without magic in a way that's believable. But even flies stuck on something like fly paper can still move their arms, so she used magic. Salem Sass finally gets to see this and tells Sabrina to go up to her. And she casts a spell that will make it take 1 hour for her to escape, which is when her movie will be done. She deserves it. And she ends the story by complaining about Sabrina's pun. Can't you come up with a better pun than that? She's not Amanda, so I actually kinda liked her. I loved this issue. The first story was by Bill Gallagher. It was predictable and basic. All that happened was that Sabrina's aunts got turned into toddlers and she had to babysit them. But fortunately they kept the pacing fast because she barely had to do any babysitting. And instead she immediately got to talk to Clarissa. And then only had to wait a little while before she got the aging cream from her. Hilda says there weren't any instructions on the youth cream, which is total bullshit. They would get sued by a ton of people. I think it was all a scam to force her to buy aging cream as well. But at least that made sense, as long as you assume that. I wish it was explained that it was intentionally put in the youth cream that only aging cream could reverse it specifically for the money. The second story, by Dan Parent, was about Sabrina turning Amy into a germ for a justified reason after Amy gave her an insult that was actually pretty funny when they were in chemistry class. Maybe I'd like Amy if she made me laugh a lot more often with her clever sarcasm. The story ends surprisingly quickly instead of being padded out, because it turns out Amy is actually still with the germs when Sabrina goes to look for her. So after briefly being held still by a microbe, she tells Amy to scream to get its attention and then zaps things back to normal. It's good that she was held still by a microbe so that she got some karma for what she did to Amy. I'm still wondering why the hell she couldn't have brought Amy back without shrinking herself though. She still knew what she looked like. The final story, by Dan Parent, was about Sabrina having to babysit her troublemaking cousin Esmeralda during a date with Harvey. Well, she does keep using magic while Harvey's around, with no explanation about why Harvey didn't see her shapeshift to the meatloaf. I ended up kinda liking her because she wasn't nearly as evil as Amanda, who transformed Sabrina into a doll and trapped her in a toy box with some other innocent adults for a whole episode. And before that, she shrunk her and put her in a bottle or something, which she's done a lot before. She's a saint compared to Amanda, so what if she wants a better supper? Who cares if she wants to see what Harvey and Sabrina are talking about? That's actually relatable. The only stupid thing she did was summon the actual circus in a house with a mortal in it. Does she really not care? Well, she has no reason to care, and neither does Sabrina, because they can both erase memories. It's just a minor inconvenience to Sabrina. I liked all the creative variety in what they did with magic. I liked seeing her turn into a fly and get stuck on flypaper, though she really should have seen it coming and avoided it. I wish I knew why her aunts had to step out and leave Sabrina alone with her, but that's a nitpick, I guess. I can easily assume there was a family emergency or something.